In this episode, we have an interview with Dan True in which we draw our weapons and hack through combat and combat encounters. Welcome to the Mythras Matters podcast, Season 1, Episode 18. It's all about the combat. Hello and welcome to Mythras Matters, a podcast dedicated to the Mythras rule set and all its supplements. As always, I am your host, Inwils, and welcome to November. I really enjoyed listening back to the M-Space episode last month, and I saw that there is a new M-Space book out and now in full colour, definitely worth a purchase. Our clocks went back an hour last weekend, so here in the UK we are officially out of British summertime, and I must admit I'm enjoying the dark evenings and chilly weather. I always think that RPGs on dark nights seem more appropriate. I still remember the walk home from somebody else's house after a midweek gaming session, thinking about what had happened as I gazed up at the stars. Fond memories. But we have a packed episode this month, so I can't spend time reminiscing about my childhood. Let's press on and see what's been happening in the Odess campaign. So, sticking with last month's version of campaign updates, I'm not going to detail what the players and characters have been getting up to in the world of Odess, but if you do want to see that, then don't forget to check out our actual play videos on my YouTube channel. Instead of that, I'm going to have a quick chat about an issue which has come up in our campaign with some rather large weapons. So I have to say that I'm a very fluid GM. I like to co-create a world alongside the players and have the world react to what is happening both in the world and the repercussions of characters' actions. I know that some players really enjoy micromanaging their characters, making careful note about where items of equipment are and how many of them dangle from their belt, while others are less concerned about that level of detail. As a GM, I like to allow everyone to enjoy the game how they like to play it. I'm not one to say where was that or how are you carrying that. In my book, as long as it doesn't impact negatively on gameplay, then it's really up to the players. However, there has been something which has been playing on my mind a lot, and that's characters with big weapons. When I say big weapons, I'm talking about huge weapons like glaives and great hammers. They do a significant amount of damage, and I do feel that there is a need for some trade-off for carrying these weapons around. So I've spoken to my players about this and said that I'm not going to keep asking them where their weapon is when they are climbing or running or just engaging in some bar chat. This is up to them as players how they want to play the game, but I have insisted on some additional rules which I have added to cover these huge weapons in combat. So I thought I would share them with you, and then you can let me know what you think. Okay then, these are the ideas. So whenever somebody is using a huge weapon in combat, the following situation modifiers happen. Number 1, no one can actually fight in the square next to you in fear of being hit by that huge wielded weapon. Number 2, no one can fight the same monster as you, i.e. fighting next to you in fear of being hit by that large or huge wielding weapon. And finally, no one can pass through your square as usual, because we say that you can move through a friendly square, in order to get somewhere else. But if there's a huge weapon being wielded, then that's not possible. And why? Well, it's in the fear of being hit by that huge weapon. This is usually the point that everyone points me to a page in the core rulebook and say, rules always existed for this, but you all know what I'm like by now. So do add your thoughts to the forum discussion on the Design Mechanism Forum website. I look forward to hearing your view. So next up, the interview section. I was really looking forward to this interview with Dan True. I know he had appeared on the Opposed Roll podcast, and I was looking forward to discuss combat with him. We chatted for some time, so settle back, grab a drink, and be prepared to be inspired. Apologies for the sound quality at times. My recording was dodgy throughout, but I've done my best. So, first of all, Dan, would you like to introduce who you are and how are you connected with Mythras?
Yes, sure. My name is Dan True. I'm 32 years old. I live in Denmark, and I've been playing Mythras and the Mongoose RuneQuest 6 and Mongoose RuneQuest 2 before that for 8 or 9 years now. I came over from D&D. That was back in like 3rd edition days, I think. And I'm very engaged in the forum and the Discord channel, and I am the author of the 2 combat modules, which are out at the moment, and I have 2 more to go soon.
Fantastic. So the 2 combat modules out are Breaking the Habit and Take Cover. I think that's right, isn't it? So what was the inspiration behind those then?
Well, the inspiration came actually from, years of forum discussions, because Mythras combat is not a particularly hard combat system to get to grips with. There are definitely simple ones, of course, but there are also many which are more complex, and some which look simpler at the surface. For instance, D&D 3rd edition. But when you start to dig into the various nitty pieces of class abilities and feats, then suddenly it explodes in complexity. And so Mythras in the sort of middle, but it has a lot of, you can keep digging into the complexity and how it, but there's a lot of complexity as you dig down. And I could just see that a lot of people in the forum posts and the questions they were asking just they weren't getting all out of it that they could. And, after having answered forum posts for several years, I realized that this is just not the best way of doing it. So I was a scout back when I was like 14, 15, 16 years old. And we also always worked with like learning by doing. So I thought, let's just write some combat encounters, which instead of trying to be fun combat encounters by themselves, which of course they should still be, but mainly as, learning tools. So that was the inspiration. And one of the primary things I had struggled with myself back in like Mongoose RuneQuest 2 days, and that I saw a lot of people on the forum, was the choose location as the default choice and choice paralysis. So breaking the habit was born from that.
Is that the habit that you're referring to when you say choose location?
Yeah, that's the habit.
I must admit, I had Hengis, who plays in the campaign, as the main sort of like warrior character. He always used to use bleed. That seemed to be the go-to one, and then they've slowly changed from bleed to choose location and impale. That's often a very popular choice.
And you can use so I thought of choose location when breaking the habit, but in all honesty, if you have your group fixated on 1 or 2 choose location special effects always, then the lecture is the same, right? So it doesn't matter if you use bleed all the time, if you use impale all the time, or trip all the time. Breaking the habit tries to teach you to choose the right special effect for the right situation, because going bleed all the time is just, a lot of your rolls are going to be low hit rolls, where you just roll maybe 10 on your dice, and bleed is an almost wasted special effect in that situation. So you're going to be wasting a lot of your special effects, and your special effects are fairly precious. So they did cost you an action point and a successful roll after all. So regardless of what your fixation is, it's usually wasteful in some situations.
Because I haven't been playing Mythras for very long at all compared to everyone else, but I must admit, when I started, I didn't give the opponents any specials. Is that something that you like to do? I've just started to do it now, give them those specials. Do you think that the specials should be on both sides or just one side?
Oh yeah, definitely. You get much more interesting combats. I've had some really good ones. I mean, where if I had removed special effects from the opponents, they would not have been particularly interesting combats. For instance, once where I was playing through Book of Quests, where one of my players was playing a Minotaur. So he was fairly powerful in melee combat, but the cost was that he couldn't wear a lot of armor, because who on earth was crafting metal armor for a Minotaur? Who would do that? and if you found someone to do it, it would be insanely expensive, right? Yeah. So he was almost killed by toad people. I think it's one of the encounters, frog people. One bleed effect from a knife and a failed endurance roll. And in the beginning of the combat, and he kept on fighting, losing fatigue throughout, and he was just saved by an application of first aid at the end. It was very, very close, and that just brought tension to the entire combat encounter, because he soon became isolated and like surrounded, so the others were away from him, knowing he was bleeding out, and him just being swarmed and fighting the good fight, but knowing that he had like this counter ticking down, that if the others didn't reach him and start applying first aid, he would lose his character. And it's also one of the things that, you know, a serious wound can be downgraded, or a major wound can be downgraded by a lock point. But once the bleed starts, you can use lock points, like win these endurance rolls, but it doesn't stop the count. Of course, you can rule as a game master, but it can really bring tension to a fight, right? And the same with Impale, the same with Trip. So I've had some really good ones where, because of correctly applied Trip, the combat sudden ended up as a scrap on the bottom of a cave instead of a heroic fight. So I think it would be a shame not to apply it towards the players themselves.
I actually started to implement it. Hengist wears very tough armor, and he was almost like getting to realize that he didn't have to parry attacks because it couldn't get through his armor. I had this vision of little pygmies or small creatures gripping and attaching themselves to the warrior, in the end take him down, and it worked really well. And all of a sudden now the parrying is definitely, and passive blocking and definitely in there. I just noticed when you were talking about combat, do you use fatigue in combat? We've always used that. Is that something you use as well?
Yes, in theory, but most of my combat encounters are over before it really starts to accrue. But there have been situations where, for instance, where they've had to like scale a cliff. At the top, there's a combat encounter, so they're already exhausted from scaling the cliff. So there are situations where they fought with fatigue, but I don't do the nitty-gritty counting of combat actions unless where I can see, okay, this is starting to get ridiculous, right? So as soon as I say, okay, I think these two have been fighting,
right,
you know, completely without pause for 3 or 4 rounds, then I just do like a back of the hand calculation. Okay, fatigue should start to, but that happens fairly rarely.
One of the things I really like about the Mythras combat system is that I really like playing boring fighters. I've never been one, when I play D&D, I never wanted to be something really special. I just wanted to be a fighter. And I think the specials really allow the fighters to be fighters. Actually think about the situation, think about what needs to be done, whether or not they need to bypass a shield or bypass armor, etc., to actually cause damage.
And it's something I really like about Mythras, and especially because in the end we're playing heroic fantasy, so we're trying to have games that emulate some sort of fiction. It could be the old sagas, it could be classic fantasy, whatever floats your boat, right? But in something that's bothered me with, for instance, some versions of D&D, I think it's gotten better, is that in the old, sagas and the old heroic tales, you have people triumphing over evil, or the supernatural by the strength of the will and the strength of the sword arm. Not because they had insane class abilities, not because they had spells. Of course, that is also part of some stories, that the old wizard that helps the young hero and stuff like that, right? But in the end, I think the hero should prevail because of them being able to overcome the supernatural, not just being an instance of the supernatural themselves. So I think it's sad when you have systems where wizards and clerics dominates completely, and poor fighters are just after level 6 or 8 they're useless, right? I think that's really sad when it goes like that. I can completely understand it when you start like building this complete magical world that suddenly someone scratches their head and says, why is anyone fighting with just a sword? But unless, of course you can embrace that and then just say, okay, this is a magical world. If anyone, like Eberron for instance, where if you're a fighter, you better have, wands and magical bombs and stuff like that prepared, because that's just how magical the world is. That's fine. I like that. But if you're trying to go for this gritty medieval fantasy where there are dragons hiding in the woods, then I think you should try to have something where magic is usually the antagonist and not the protagonist to some degree, right?
Well, I don't have any magical items in my campaign at all, because I came from a D&D campaign that people would collect items and racial adjustments and this, that, the other to get so many positives to a dice roll. I remember watching one and they rolled a 7, a D20, and then said to me 19. And I was just sort of thinking, what's going on here? I think what you were saying beforehand, that Mythras really has this depth of combat, and it allows you to excel at it, but also does not remove it from being deadly. It has that really nice balance between the two. So what about one of the questions that I'm still puzzling about, and I've still not got the answer to, is the idea of ranged weapons. I think things like knives and spears that can be thrown quite readily seem to work, but I've never managed to see an archer being used correctly. What's your opinions about those?
Well, this is essentially what the take cover combat module is about, right? Where you have a mix. I think 2 of the characters are melee characters who can throw stuff, who have like thrown weapons, and the 2 others are more ranged, where melee is a secondary, like classical archers. And the combat module delves into it, but what it can be boiled down to first of all, you don't have to parry, because even if you have like a thrown weapon, you'll fairly soon go into combat, usually, right? So, but when you're lobbing out crossbow bolts, arrows from your bow, then yes, you don't have to parry. So the reload is not as bad, because you're not wasting half your number of actions on defending yourself, right? And you can, when you shoot an arrow, you can apply special effects at a distance. That's essentially that. Those special effects can be used for a lot of interesting things, like tripping someone in the open or getting someone to take cover.
Yeah, exactly.
2 archers in Mythras, if they use their special effects correctly, and if the game master doesn't play the NPCs or the opponents suicidal, should be able to like keep down an entire group of enemies.
And I really like that, because that is scenes from leg. Players can keep mobs behind rocks and boulders, with effective archery. Is there a rule? And the only person who has any thrown weapons in our campaign is Hazra. He has a short spear that he uses. So I'm not too clear on the rules. If you throw or do a ranged weapon into existing melee, is the difficulty increased from standard to hard in that situation?
There are rules for it. I don't remember them at the top of my head, but there is a section on shooting into crowds, which the combat would be, right? Unless of course, in some situations, if you're behind and there's only 2 people fighting, then you can say it's fairly trivial to make sure you only hit one. But But in general, melee tends to be fairly chaotic, right? So there is the shooting into crowds rule. I don't remember precisely what it does because I rarely use it.
Yeah.
Because my campaigns, at least for the last few years, tend to be more like cloak and dagger stuff right now.
Nice. I don't know if you know the module White Death. It's when the players play 1980 spy characters, but they're actually armed with rifles and bullets and guns, handguns. And I really saw a lot of the range specials coming into play like that, keeping somebody behind cover by using specials to keep firing and things like that. And it really was excellent. People were doing
definitely. If Take Cover hadn't been fantasy focused, and it essentially ended up like that because the fundamental thing about like climbing the statue is it was actually Pete's idea because he wanted to something like to evoke like the films he saw as a young kid. I had a different setup which was too complex, and then Pete threw this in like with the climbing the statue and stealing a jewel, and I was like, perfect, just we'll do that. So, but if I hadn't done that, I probably would have done a modern one, and I'm still thinking about doing a modern. I need to get more to grips with the modern applications of Mythras, but having like soldiers in like a modern, it could be Iraq or it could be like World War II or something like that would probably be an okay combat module as well, just to illustrate the various things.
Most definitely, and with settings like White Death, but also Luther Arkwright settings, that would be absolutely fantastic. It's interesting you were describing that situation of somebody climbing a statue to get a gem, because I'm sure it's on the front of the player's handbook in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. I'm sure this is what I don't know if you can see that.
Is that what that image is about? I remember the book, but I have never looked like at it. Yeah, I can see.
So they're actually and just when you were describing it, then I'm thinking. I mean, this is Advanced Dungeons and Dragons first edition. You know,
it's like 80 or 82 or something like
that. Yeah, it's what I sort of like grew up playing, and then I came back to D&D 5th edition, didn't like it at all, and then looked for something else. And we really played RuneQuest when we were growing up as well, and then found Mythras. So one of the things I really struggle with combat is trying to get the balance correct. I either make encounters that are sort of like completely wiping out the party, or that they wander through and it's like a walk in the park and it's very easy for them. How would you recommend, or how do you actually create your encounters?
The first thing I do is try to like count effective action points. That's like the basic rule. Like if you have 4 action points and you have 50% skills and you have 2 effective action points, you can count on being successful with 2 actions, 2 attack actions or 2 parry actions, right? So I try to count that up and make sure that it's sort of equal. And then if you have like the defenders have something to cover behind, like an advanced position or something like that, then I try to like adjust that. But I only do it very much on the surface, and then I adjust as I go through the encounter. There's this funny thing when it comes to role-playing games where everyone will say when a game master is running an investigation scene or a social encounter scene or trying to buy something from a blacksmith scene, that they should just adjust things as they go. But then someone, when it comes to combat, is saying, oh, you can't do that, that's cheating. So as soon as you move into combat and there are more mechanics at play, then suddenly changing them on the fly is cheating, whereas doing precisely the same thing with the blacksmith is fine because you're trying to tell a story. So, and I don't buy into that. If I need to change the stats of the creatures or the players because I've made a mistake that will end up in a total party kill, I will change that on the fly and I will find some way to cover it up. That doesn't mean that, the players can't count on things, because I only do it to like progress the story, right? That they might still lose a character, although rarely, because my players are usually fairly good at keeping themselves safe after many years of fairly clever gotten used to me. So I don't have any qualms about adjusting on the fly, because it's so hard. And the only reason some systems try to have this idea about balance, again, like D&D 3rd edition had this like encounter rating, is because they've narrowed the mechanics so far down into class abilities and spells that you can math it all, and it only works when you have a certain party composition, and it only works when you're fighting on a flat surface in a room with room to maneuver and all these underlying assumptions of the system. As soon as you try to change any of these things, the whole system breaks down. So you can't do that. And I'm a software engineer, so I know about creating systems. And something as complex as a combat where you don't have these underlying assumptions about party composition and the size of the room, where things don't happen in a 10 meter by 10 meter room all the time with a flat floor, then it is an impossible calculation to make any sort of system like that. Counting action points is a fairly good way, but again, you can have this with equal effective action points. Have a situation where someone has a bow in a prepared position and someone doesn't, they're just going to get nuked. It's very hard to capture these things. So just make an interesting encounter, like you would make an interesting social encounter or an interesting investigation scene, and then adjust on the fly to try to keep that encounter playing as you intended. Or if the players are smart, come up with some clever trick that you didn't foresee, of course, go along with it. But so it shouldn't be that you're railing them. I would rather cheat a bit myself than I would have to narrow my encounters down to always being in a 10 by 10 room on a flat surface. So.
And I really like that approach. I'm really into the narrative, and even during combat, although some of my players do expand what they're talking about, I like the specials. I think it's really good. But then if they're impaling, I want to sort of describe what it looks like, so they actually get that feel. Do you think a lot about weapons when you're making your encounters? Do you sort of think, oh, they've got a two-handed weapon?
Oh yes, definitely. So let's try to systemize a bit. I have a few things that I go through when I design an encounter, and the first thing is, as I hinted at before, location. If all your encounters are in a 10 by 10 room or flat field or a courtyard with no terrain or something like that, then they're gonna feel samey to some degree, right? So first of all, try to find some interesting locations. It could be something that either is obvious, like you having a wall or a house or something on going on the roof of buildings, right? Having a roof chase or something like that in a city, or it could be in a swamp or in thick undergrowth. And then try to, when you have that, then try to think through how it will apply to the combat. And if you need to introduce some additional rules, for instance, Mythras doesn't have any rules for thick undergrowth, how it impacts your movement. But you can takes 3 seconds to say, okay, that reduces your movement by 2 meters or something like that. Or you need to continuously make athletic checks to not have that penalty or something like that.
Yeah, it's nice.
And it doesn't have to be the same in encounter, because if you do that in one encounter, and then the next time you have thick undergrowth, you find a different rule because you want to change the thing. And players say, oh, but last time we had thick undergrowth, you needed to do the athletic check. And then you say, yeah, but that was thorns, and this is something else, right? You don't have to be that consistent with it, because there are so many different kinds of undergrowth in the world that you can mix and matches a bit across different locations, right? So trying to find something that will impact in some way. If you just have it in a flat field where there's a wall, but no one is on the wall, or you can't get up on the wall, then it doesn't really matter again, right? So try to find an interesting location. Look at movies, look at games, find something that's evocative, right? Like being fired upon while climbing a statue, or have a narrow alleyway that you need to break through, right? Both of these are first defined by the location. And the next two I'm working on is the same. One is dealing with how to play monsters, and that has also a closed area where there's things you need to rescue someone, and the other is a bar brawl. You're in an inn, right? So that will also define how that combat counter goes. So location is really important, and don't be afraid of making special rules to make the location more interesting.
Fantastic.
So, and the next thing is fighting styles, right? So both of your players and which you were hinting at, and especially of the opponents, because
nice, yeah.
Try to tie that into location, right? Because if you play like Mythras, at least the published settings, then the combat styles and the available weapons will be very tied to the culture. So you're not going to have this huge variance. You're not going to, if you're playing Mythic Britain, you're not going to have someone with a huge ball and chain and someone else with a crossbow. And most people are going to have swords, spears, axes, and shields, knife. So something to that degree. So there's going to be consistency, at least in your opponents, and often also among your players. But what you can then do is look at the location and saying, okay, so you have these mythic Britain warriors with large shields.
Yeah.
How are they going to fight in different situations? Because on a flat field, maybe they're going to make a shield wall if there's enough of them. If there's not enough of them, or if the terrain doesn't do that, again, let's say it's a swamp, so there are like holes with water everywhere, then what are they going to do? Are they going to like try to block off some of the passages where you can walk? Do they even know where you can walk to just dust the opponent? Imagine trying to like cross a swamp area and you don't know where it's safe to go, but the goblins that attack you do. That could be a very interesting counter already there, because maybe the like knowledge of the swamp is part of the combat style of these goblins or whatever it is, right?
Yeah, exactly. And they will know where those places are.
Yes.
You know, I am making notes, by the way, as you're talking, because so I can implement some of these in my own campaign. So
try to have the combat style like reflected. Just because you have 8 opponents, which are all mythic Britain warriors with the same combat style, doesn't mean they should do a shield wall all the time. If they're in a swamp with a lot of holes, as I said, they would do something else. If they're defending a wall, they would do something else. If they're in a siege, they would do something else. You wouldn't try to make a shield wall and storm up the hill of a modern Bailey castle, right? You would do something else. Maybe they would do like a testudo thingy with the shields, or anything, something like that, right?
They will be very familiar with their fighting style, so they would know what's appropriate and what's inappropriate this time. Yeah,
precisely. And don't be afraid to guide them as the game master, because your players don't know necessarily how like Saxon warriors would fight, and neither do you necessarily historically correct, but you designed the combat encounter, so you must have spent at least a few minutes thinking, oh, if they do this, they're going to be successful. If they do this, which might be the traditional way of doing it, they won't. So you might be able to say, oh, the traditional way would be doing this, but maybe take a law, strategy, and tactics role, and I'll tell you more if you succeed, or something like that, right? So yeah, combat style is definitely important, and you should again try to tie it into the location, because even if you take something like familiar, like a modern soldier won't fight the same way in different locations, right? He will fight differently in a forest with a lot of cover versus a desert versus from a vehicle versus in a building. So take that into account. And the next thing I do is take into account the objectives of both parties. So I would say most combats in most gaming systems are just you're trying to kill each other, right? There's the players who encounter a monster or some opponent and they try to kill them, and the opponent defends themselves and try to kill the characters back. Then the next layer is saying to the characters, your objective actually isn't killing everyone. You have an objective with this fight, which is, ties into the story. Again, breaking the habit, the objective is to get through and escape the city. And take cover, the objective is to, if you can, steal the large jewel in the statue's head, but again, escape. Even though the objective is the same, try to escape with your lives, they play very differently because of the location and because of the combat styles, right? So the two previous points. And so in those cases, the objective is the same, but you can have a lot of other objectives. Maybe the objective could be like either just killing one of them, but not the others. Yeah. So maybe they have one leader who you need to kill because he's like the cult leader, but you don't really want to hurt all his followers because they know they're just being brainwashed.
I really like that idea of this objectives, and I think I've too often fallen into the habit of, right, you need to rescue this damsel who's tied to the thing. Let's have the combat, and then the combat finishes and they rescue the person. And I really like that way that the objective becomes an integral part of the combat, and then that leads back to feeds into the location and the fighting style. Excellent. Yes, love it.
Especially because in that situation there, it would be much more interesting if the fight takes place like right in front of the cage where the princess is being held. Yeah. Because then you might have someone that like clears around the combat and frees the princess. Exactly. And then on the way out yells to the others, okay, it's time to go. Because then the combat, then you can adjust the number or the difficulty of the enemies to actually say you really can't defeat them in a straight up fight. But maybe most of the party can like hold them off while one person rescues the princess. And then those people holding them off will have a really tough time and burn through some luck points and have some really intense things. Whereas the person rescuing the princess might have to like break open a lock or cross a ravine or something else that like is a challenge for them and makes it take some time. But that changes the encounter completely, because suddenly it's just not slaughter everyone, go to the princess. It's actually get in, hold the line while Adam goes and does his thief thing at the cage, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
It could be the same with getting an item. We're like, okay, you need to hold them off at these two entrances while I climb up here and grab the thingy. Or it could even be, if you move into like real world objectives, it could also be like changing someone's mental state or an organization's mental state. You could have a fight where you actually, maybe you kill someone, but that's not actually what you want to do. Is like you want to stir the wasp nests, right? So there's this goblin lair, but the goblins are always in the bloody lair, so they only go out to raid. So what you do is that you keep attacking them, just like pinpricks, to try to like get them to raid the village, so you can ambush them and kill them all, or something like that. So that could be like changing the whole mental state either of an individual, or the leader, or the whole organization.
I really like that.
Or it could just be like gaining intelligence. Maybe you just want to know how the goblins fight, so you can tell the king, so that when he sends his army, you can like report to him, but you don't need to kill all 700 goblins.
And that will really influence the specials that people are using. I was just thinking about, an idea about when you were talking about trying to get a gang of goblins following somebody away, so somebody else. Now, you're not going to sit there impaling them to nearby trees, because you actually want them to follow them.
And you're going to lose your main weapon if you impale someone and then run away, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I really like that.
Yeah. So you can take a lot of cues from like real history and saying, okay, if you were U.S. soldier in the Iraq War, what is your objective in the individual fight? Or if you're an insurgent, what is your objective? Because they're not necessarily kill everyone on the opposing side. It is much more complex. So that's the first level. Let's think about what's the objective of the players. But then you can also say, what's the objective of the opponents? So that the opponents are not always just reacting. So you can have a situation where the characters have one objective, free the princess, but the objective of the opponents isn't necessarily protect the princess, as maybe it is this particular character is part of our myths or something like that. Our seer has foretold something. So when they attack us, we recognize that, and our objective is actually to capture that single character. We don't care about the rest. Then suddenly you have two objectives, which are not just like inverse. They can both succeed, right? The characters can go in and rescue the princess, but have one of them taken capture by the goblins.
Yeah.
Because the goblins think they're like holy or the devil or something like that.
I think my combat has always ended up with just sort of like them just fighting, if that makes sense, without any sort of... The objectives have always been for the players to kill the monsters, and the monsters to kill the players. But I really like that idea of actually engaging with what are the actual objectives here. So, and that would influence the whole combat, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would. And then you can have more objectives, of course. You might have a primary objective, a secondary objective, or a tertiary objective, and then maybe have, if you know the objective, say as a game master, you should preferably know the objectives, right? But you say you've given them 3 different objectives in order that they want to accomplish, but then 3 rounds into the combat, something changes which like nulls the first objective. So they need to rescue the princess, they need to find out who the goblin high priest is, and they need to find out how the goblins are fighting and where the main base is. And then as they're raiding the outpost, 3 rounds into the combat, the goblin priest kills the princess. That's your main objective gone. You sort of still need to complete 2 others, but you're gonna throw your characters, your players, really on the back foot about what's going on here. And then the high priest maybe leaves with most of his warriors and just leaves a rear guard to just keep the characters away from falling. And then you say, okay, so the princess is dead, and we learned something about how they fight, but not where the base is, and we didn't kill the goblin priest. Do we follow them, or what do we do? Yeah. That's much more interesting than just going into a room and fighting everyone until one side is completely dead.
I was also thinking, while you were talking about that scenario, I suddenly thought it'd be really interesting to have players with different objectives
Yeah.
as well. One of the objectives could be, right, you have to try to rescue her, but it looks like the goblins are going to take her off. Then killing her is a better objective.
Maybe because she's going to be sacrificed or something like that, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then that can really sort of like interact and the party as well. If, they've got different objectives. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I had a classic example of that from my own game is back when I ran the Book of Quests campaign, one with the Minotaur I mentioned earlier. One of my players was a magician in hiding, or not in hiding. So the Book of Quests world has this, I think it's called the Order of Truth, which is like fighting against chaos. And he was a member of the part of the Order of Truth which doesn't mind using magic to fight chaos. So he knew magic, but he was still a good guy. But he had this chaos item essentially, which you could use to sacrifice people and gain magic from the power, a fairly easy thing. But he had continuously had to, first of all, keep it secret from the other characters and the players. They only learned about this fairly long into the campaign, but he also had to balance this so he didn't overdo it, because he knew that if he sacrificed everyone and used a lot of magic points, he would probably turn evil at some point, right? So he was trying, when they were fighting someone he deemed really bad, not just ordinary people. Ordinary people, they maybe you kill them, maybe they surrender, whatever. But when they were fighting chaos cultists, he was trying to leave them alive, because then when the rest of the party moved on, he could just oh, wait a minute, I'll be a second, and then just sacrifice them to regain some magic points. And then find some excuse why he dazzled and that was really cool, because he had to he had this constant balancing act about how he was playing his character, but it also influenced how he was fighting, because he always tended to draw people into other rooms or where he could use his magic without the other people seeing them. And when they were fighting someone, he deemed, okay, I don't mind if I sacrifice these two evil gods, then try to leave them only unconscious but not completely dead, and then avoid the Minotaur from stomping on them and stuff like that, right? It was really interesting.
I'm dying to know, did the party find out about this?
Actually, no. The players found out, but the characters never did.
Right, nice, fantastic.
But the players only found out I think a year into the campaign. It was at some point there were enough what we call ninja notes being passed around so that they knew something was involved, and then too many weird wounds that turned out to only be scratches and stuff like that, right? So but that was really cool, and it was because he had a character objective which were different from the others, but actually several, right? Hide it. He had his powers, but he needed to hide them, and because there was no natural magic point regeneration, or maybe there was one MP a month or something like that, he essentially every time he cast a spell, he had to find a way to regain those magic points at some point, which would entail doing an evil deed.
That was epic. I really like that idea. So what's after objectives? Is there any more for my list? We got location, fighting style, objectives.
I think that covers it, and then balance as you go, as we talked about.
Yeah.
So you don't get hung up on an individual thing. But I would say those three things, and then the balance as you go caveat covers most of what I do when I do encounter design, including when I design for combat encounters to be published.
Fantastic. That has been so helpful for me as a GM and somebody who's new to the game. That's been fantastic. You did you say that you're working on something else, a combat module at the moment as well?
Well, as I said, I have two combat modules ready. Not ready, working on. And one is in preliminary editorial process, which means that I've written it, and I need the design mechanism to take a look at to see we'll go with this, in which case I move on to playtesting. And the other has maybe a few evenings worth of writing before that's in the same state. So those two combat modules. And then I'm working on a setting book called Book of Schemes, which has been underway for a fairly long time, which is delving with intrigue in an urban setting.
Oh, that sounds epic. I really like the sound of that.
Yeah, it's turning out really, really nice, I think.
And breaking the habit and take cover, are they available through drive-through or through the Design Mechanism store as well?
Yes, at least on drive-through. Breaking the habit is PDF only, at least in English. I know it can be printed in German and French, I think, but in English it's PDF only. For now, it will be print on demand soon, and take cover is print on demand through drive-through.
I've actually got both. I should have played it right the way at the beginning of the campaign before the characters sort of like were made up, but we're so much into a campaign at the moment that I think it would really allow the players to develop their combat and start to pick specials that reflect a need, or try to drive towards a conclusion rather than just thinking choose location, impale, and nothing else.
What you can do is so what there's a few ways of doing it. One is just running it like with the pre-made characters completely, outside of your campaign. This is just tonight we're just doing a lesson.
Yeah.
And we're running this. Next time we're running take cover, and then just having that using the pre-made characters. That's one way of doing it. Another, if you want to use the characters in your campaign, if you were starting a new campaign, what you can do is make the characters, then run the 2 encounters with them, and then allow people to adjust if they want.
Good idea, yeah.
Because then they can learn how the characters will fare in different situations. Of course, when there are more combat modules, you're probably going to have to make a choice, right? Because you're not going to make characters and then run 6 completely unrelated
characters. We'll never get to the actual campaign. We'll just be doing combat modules.
But that could be like way of introducing new characters, saying, before we start the real game, we're going to do this. Another way is rolling as a flashback or as a dream. So you could have, so take cover is, taking place on Monster Island that is fairly specific. So you'd probably have to tailor that to your campaign. But breaking the habit could easily be something like, okay, we're going to take a flashback to right before the campaign started.
Nice idea, yeah.
Where you were in the wilderness. This was how you ended up in the wilderness, or something like that. Or the other town you fled before you ended up where we started. And so we're going to take this flashback and at some opportune moment in the campaign, maybe during downtime, and then hopefully the characters are going to be like richer for the experience afterwards, which will like reflect a narrative gap, like between seasons in a TV series or something.
And I really like that idea of flashing back to a previous time and sort of like letting them experience it. I think that would be fantastic. I was just trying to find my take cover. I found it, because I think breaking the habit, we use Roll20 as our we don't meet in real life, mainly because I know it sounds dreadful, but my party, the players, 2 of them are in America, and there's 3 of us here, but in the UK, but completely spread out. So, but yes, it comes with the maps, yeah, and they count little people as well for Roll20, which is absolutely fantastic. Yeah.
Yes, I think there's fairly good Roll20 support from people just taking these things and lifting them into the Mythras. I don't know much about Roll20, but there's like a Mythras library or something like that file template.
I've learned so much, Dan. I seriously have. I'm so inspired to sort of like develop more combat, more interesting combats and more engaging combats. Thank you so much for giving up your time to come along and be on the podcast. I really do appreciate it. And some fantastic ideas. I've made notes, as you can probably see on the interview sheet, so I'm all ready to quickly redesign Saturday's upcoming adventure. But thank you so much. I really do appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
I can safely say that I came away from that interview completely inspired, and I'm definitely looking to have Dan back along with maybe someone else to have a triangular discussion about encounters and world building, something which I always need some support with. And remember, if you would like to contribute to the podcast, then why not just drop me an email or message and let me know what you would like to cover. I'm always looking for reviews or interviews with people. So if you are interested, you can email me at inwils@gmail.com, or send me a message on Discord or the various forums I frequent. Also, if you are interested, I've started a series of videos on YouTube called The Gibbering GM. These are based on my thoughts relating to RPGs, and I am going to cover a range of topics because I've only recorded one so far, which definitely caused some interesting points in the comment section. I've got more to create on that channel, so please do go and check them out and let me know what you think about the rules or ideas that I discuss there. And that's it. Another episode of Mythras Matters completed. As you can imagine, I am going off now to rewrite a lot of my combat encounters after Dan's fantastic advice. Next month, I will be joined by some of the in-crowd when we talk about creating characters and their backgrounds, so definitely not an episode to miss. So until next time, have a great month of gaming, and I will chat again to you all in December, along with the decorations and the eggnog. Until then, I hope that all your opposed rolls succeed and provide you with a well-deserved special. Thanks for listening, everyone. See ya. Bye. The content of this podcast is covered by the Creative Commons Attribution 3.0 license, so please give appropriate credit if you are sharing or copying any part of this podcast. Thank you.